Okay. Welcome everyone, and thank you to all of our in-person guests and our over 500 guests on Zoom this evening. I'm Sarah Betancourt, and I'm representing the Concord and the Concord-Carlisle Regional School District Special Ed Parent Advisory Council. It's my honor this evening to introduce Dr. Ross Greene. Dr. Greene is a clinical psychologist and a New York Times best-selling author whose influential work is known around the world. His model of care, collaborative and proactive solutions, helps adults solve problems and build collaborative relationships with children in their care. We are so fortunate to have him here with us this evening. And join me, please, in welcoming Dr. Greene.
So, what do I spend most of my time talking about and doing? I spend most of my time while running a nonprofit that is aimed at all kinds of things, including being a hub of free resources on the model you're about to hear about, but also advocating on behalf of kids, especially those with concerning behaviors, on their programs. What are we advocating for? Compassionate, effective treatment of kids with social, emotional, and behavioral challenges. Turns out that compassionate and effective treatment for those kids is compassionate and effective treatment for all kids. So I don't have to talk about this in the context of just kids with concerning behaviors, because I wouldn't do anything differently if a kid didn't have concerning behaviors. This is what I would do. What are we advocating against? Punitive, exclusionary, disciplinary practices. Detention, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment in the 19 states that still do it in the public schools. Hard to imagine, 2023. Restraint, seclusion, arrests. Those, in our view, at Lives in the Balance, the nonprofit I founded, are counterproductive, don't accomplish the mission, and especially don't accomplish the mission given what we now know about why kids exhibit concerning behaviors. So that is what I would like to lead with here. Is I think that there has never been a more exciting time to be a kid with concerning behaviors. It's never been better, but especially to be the parent or educator or other caregiver of a kid with concerning behaviors. And why am I so excited? Because of what we now know, and what we didn't know until maybe the last 40 or 50 years. But what we now know should be informing our practices, and in many places, what we now know is not yet informing our practices. We now know why kids with concerning behaviors exhibit concerning behaviors. Let me first tell you what it's not. Why do I need to start with what it's not? Because what it's not is what we had been believing for a very long time. And it's not what we've been believing for a very long time, but what we've been believing for a very long time led us to many of our most common practices. We had been believing for a very long time that concerning behavior is the byproduct of passive, permissive, inconsistent, non-contingent, inept parenting. Raise your hand if you are a parent. It's your fault. Now, what a therapeutic thing to tell parents, yes? I find the best way to get people engaged in treatment is to blame them for something that's causing them a lot of pain. And that's how I was trained to think. But I thankfully started questioning the way I was trained to think almost when I was being trained to think it. Not quite. I still didn't spare many kids hours of being held in timeout. And I didn't spare many kids being restrained and secluded by my own hand in inpatient psychiatry units. But fortunately, those are experiences that started pointing me in another direction. Yes, over 40 years ago, you would have found me on an inpatient psychiatry unit in Miami, Florida, laying kids out flat and throwing them in a seclusion room. And almost immediately questioning my practices. They made no sense then. They don't make any sense now. And not even with our most difficult kids do they make sense. So that's what we had been believing. So I know you're chomping at the bit, so what do we now believe? What does the research tell us is the reason kids have concerning behaviors? And by the way, this applies to adults too. I hope you're not underwhelmed by the answer, but the answer is because they are lacking skills. And that has revolutionized our understanding of them. I'll tell you what skills in a second. It should also have revolutionized how we treat them. And in many places, it has. And in many places, it hasn't. Yet. So now you know my life's mission, for at least as long as I'm breathing, but people will pick it up after I'm done. Heighten awareness of the practices, heighten awareness of what's really going on with these kids, and heighten awareness of alternative ways of doing things that are non-punitive and non-exclusionary, one of which we will be talking about tonight. But let's start with what skills. Well, we'd still be sitting here about 15 minutes from now if I ran through the entire list. So I'm going to give you the global skills. Flexibility, adaptability. Frustration tolerance. Problem solving. Emotion regulation. Skills most of us take for granted. If you have them, you take them for granted. You don't even think about them if you have them. If an airplane that I'm on gets canceled or if I'm going to miss a connection, it barely moves my frustration needle at all anymore, mostly because it's happened so often and mostly because I know I can probably find another way. That's called problem solving. That's called emotion regulation. That's called frustration tolerance. Now, there are frustrations that I might not handle in such a sanguine manner. Somebody cuts me off in traffic. I live in Maine now, but I drove here for a good 20 years. Somebody cuts me off in traffic, I am not going to be quite so calm. But since I did a lot of driving in Miami, Florida, where you could get shot if you make a mess out of somebody cutting you off, I don't make a mess. But it would move the needle a little bit further. Know what I'm saying? Everybody got their thing. Kids got their thing. In kids, what thing causes a frustration response the most? Expectations they're having difficulty meeting. And that's true of all of us. Can't say that's exactly what's going on when I'm getting irritated at another driver. Because that doesn't happen very much anymore. I've been living in Maine for over 10 years now. And in Maine, we don't get irritated at other drivers. We just go slower. In fact, my Maine general practitioner gave me the best advice a doctor's ever given me. It was, Ross, slow down. I can't say that I have an easy time living by his guidance, but when I'm stuck behind somebody who's driving too slow, which is a common experience in Maine, but not here, I say, Ross, slow down. And hopefully it takes. But you especially get frustrated when there's an expectation you're having difficulty meeting. And when is it an expectation you're having difficulty meeting? Probably when it's something that's hard for you in one way or another. So unfortunately, not only did we get the parents wrong, passive, permissive, inconsistent, non-contingent, inept disciplinarians, we have also been getting the kids wrong, based on the same mentality. We've been thinking the kids were attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated, limit testing, blah, blah, blah. All of which made concerning behavior out to be the byproduct of poor parenting and unmotivated kids. Which probably explains why we have been so busy trying to motivate the kids for so long. We've also been teaching their parents how to be more firm and consistent and contingent. Both of those missions usually accomplished through use of, you've all probably done this at one point or another, so don't feel bad, rewarding the behaviors you like so as to see more of them, and punishing the behaviors you don't like so as to see less of them. And that has been the standard, that's been the status quo for a very long time, but shouldn't be anymore. Number one, it turns out, this is what really got my head turned around. My head really got turned around way back in the day when I was working with parents of a kid who was ill-behaved and suddenly discovered that they had other children in their home who were well-behaved. And I remember asking myself, how'd they do that? If they're passive, permissive, inconsistent, non-contingent disciplinarians, how did it come to pass that they have well-behaved children in their home? And I noticed that a lot of these kids weren't doing better for all of these rewards and all of these punishments we had been doling out. All of these detentions, suspensions, expulsions, restraints, seclusion, getting hit. And there's a good reason for that. Those punitive exclusionary disciplinary practices do not solve any of the problems that are causing the kids' concerning behavior in the first place. Let me paraphrase that based on the terminology we've used so far. Do not help them meet any of the expectations they're having difficulty meeting. And why might that be? Because the only thing a reward or punishment would fix is if the kid was unmotivated to meet the expectation in the first place. And I find that that is almost never the case. So if you said to me, Ross, when's the last time you recommended rewarding, punishing, timeouts, anything punitive? I would tell you I can't remember, because it was well over 35 years ago. What have I been busy doing instead? Well, since that was my training, I had to come up with something new. And what I came up with said to me, the behavior is the wrong thing to focus on in the first place. If you're focused on the kids' concerning behavior, rewards and punishments might make perfect sense. The problem with rewards, the problem with behavior is that, and this is the key message of the evening, if you remember nothing else, remember this: the concerning behavior is late. You don't want to be late. You want to be early. What comes before the concerning behavior? The expectation the kid is having difficulty meeting that's causing the concerning behavior. So now let's think about those expectations, because that's what we should be focused on. Remember this: the concerning behavior is late, and all the concerning behavior is the means by which the kid is letting you know that they're having difficulty meeting a particular expectation. That's all concerning behavior is. So we got to get attention-seeking, manipulative, coercive, unmotivated, limit testing out of our vocabularies, just like we need to get, when we're talking about parents, passive, permissive, inconsistent, non-contingent, inept disciplinarians out of our vocabularies. If this kid is responding poorly to frustration, If this kid's frustration response is maladaptive, it is because this kid is lacking skills. I'll say them again. Flexibility, adaptability, frustration tolerance, problem solving, emotional regulation. And we especially notice that the kid is lacking those skills when there are expectations they're having difficulty meeting. Good? This is actually pretty straightforward, except that it's actually common sense. The problem is, in some places it is still uncommon common sense. But it's common sense, and it's based on what the research has told us about these kids for the last 40 to 50 years. So now let's focus on expectations, shall we? Because we want to be early, not late. We don't want to be in crisis management mode. Bad stuff happens when we're in crisis management mode. That's when we do stuff to kids that we really shouldn't have to do and don't want to be doing in the first place. We want to be early. We're going to need a list of every expectation this kid is having difficulty reliably meeting. We should probably come up with a list at school if the kid has unmet expectations at school, and we should probably come up with a list at home because the kid has unmet expectations at home. And by the way, those two don't actually overlap that much. So, we also shouldn't be blaming parents for the expectations a kid is having difficulty meeting at school because they're not there. Nor, this is less common, should we be blaming educators for the expectations the kid is having difficulty meeting at home. Generally speaking, I don't hold it against educators if a kid is having difficulty brushing their teeth before going to bed at night. That's parents. But we should also not be blaming parents for the fact that the kid is having difficulty completing the double-digit division problems on the worksheet in math at school. That's school. That's their expectation. You get what I'm saying. But I should tell you the other term for unmet expectations. It's actually not the preferred term. The preferred term is unsolved problem. Also known, by the way, as problems that have yet to be solved. Also known, by the way, as problems that are waiting to be solved. And by the way, if they are waiting to be solved and have yet to be solved, then those must be very old, unsolved problems. Let's put this to the test, shall we? I saw how many parents we have in here. I think they're mostly parents. But if we have some educators, we'll tap into you as well. Raise your hand if as a parent, at some point in the next 24 hours, you're going to have one of your kids is going to have difficulty brushing their teeth before going to bed at night. Okay, so it doesn't have to be all of you, but it's a very common unsolved problem. But the reason I have you raise your hands is to make the following points. The fact that you raise your hands tells us two things. It's highly predictable, or you wouldn't have raised your hands. And it's still unsolved. Right? Raise your hand if at some point in the next 24 hours you are going to have difficulty extracting your kid's brain from the screen that has sucked it in so that they are unable to participate in more meaningful aspects of life. I saw your hands. I'm going to make the same points just to drive it home. The fact that you raised your hands tells us two things. It's highly predictable. It's not yet solved. Right? Try one more. Well, does anybody want to nominate one? Why should I nominate all of them?
Getting out of bed in the morning.
Thank you. An excellent one. Raise your hand if your kid is going to have difficulty getting out of bed in the morning sometime before Friday. You know what I'm about to say. The fact that you raised your hand tells us it's predictable. Why is predictable such a big deal? Predictable is a big deal because it tells you have to deal with it in the heat of the moment. You know it's coming. Why we end up dealing with this stuff in the heat of the moment when we know it's coming is worth pondering. I personally think it's poor planning. Because if we made our list and we decided which ones we wanted to start solving first, we could be solving all of these problems proactively. What I would call getting out in front of it. But to do that, you need your list of every expectation the kid is having difficulty meeting reliably. Even if they can meet it sometimes and not others, it's still an unsolved problem. Every expectation the kid is having difficulty meeting, reliably meeting on your watch. Raise your hand if you're an educator. A few. Let's give you a few, yes? These are no winners. These are guaranteed hands up. I was going to use slides, but I decided not to. This is more fun. I actually have to think. Raise your hand if at some point or Friday, one of your students is going to have difficulty completing a particular assignment. Guaranteed. The fact that you just raised your hands tells us two things. It's predictable, it's still unsolved. Difficulty getting along with another student. Predictable, still unsolved. And here's what's interesting. It doesn't mean you've done nothing about it. It means that, I hate to be blunt, and there's no offense intended, whatever you've done about it so far didn't work. Right? Don't feel bad. That's probably because you left out somebody very important in the process of trying to solve that problem. That's the likelihood. It could be because you thought it was your job to know what was making it hard for the kid to meet that expectation. And you thought it was your job to know what the solution was. I don't agree. I don't think it's your job to know what's getting in the kid's way. And I don't think it's your job to know what the solution was based on what you think is getting in the kid's way. So, let's talk about how we're going to solve those problems instead. You have three options. I think I have a slide for this that I'll show you. Yeah. They are called Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. But I just want to make sure we settle for a second. Why do kids exhibit concerning behaviors? Because they're lacking very important skills. Is the concerning behavior learned or the byproduct of poor parenting? No, it is a frustration response to highly specific, unsolved problems that still aren't solved, but are highly predictable. And if they are highly predictable, they can be identified proactively and solved proactively so that, this is going to sound far-fetched, but it's not, you almost never find yourself in the heat of the moment. And if you almost never find yourself in the heat of the moment, then there's no need for restraint, seclusion, or all of these other punitive exclusionary things we so commonly do in the heat of the moment to give the kid the incentive to meet the expectation they're clearly having difficulty meeting, but the fact that those incentives didn't get the job done tells you that it wasn't because the kid was lacking the incentive in the first place. How's that for a summary of the last 25 minutes? Fair? How do you solve these problems? You have three options, but in this model, You're only using 2 of them. Your 3 options are Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. You are almost never using Plan A when you're implementing this model. Plan A is when you're solving a problem unilaterally, and you just lost your partner. And I can't imagine why you wouldn't want to do this with a partner. Having a partner doesn't take away your power, because solving problems isn't about power in the first place. Solving problems is about collaboration. And that's Plan B. Plan B is where you're solving the exact same problem, but instead of doing it unilaterally, you're doing it collaboratively. When you're doing Plan B, the kid has voice. The kid gives you the information you've been missing about what's been making it hard for them to meet this expectation in the first place. And the kid is centrally involved in coming up with the solution. That's collaborative. And then your third option is Plan C. You would use Plan C for one or both of 2 reasons. Reason number 1, you make this list of unsolved problems and you take a look at the list and you say to yourself, in the case of some kids, especially kids who've been struggling for a long time, boy, this kid has a lot of unsolved problems. I didn't realize the list was so long. Look at all of the expectations we are placing on this kid across the course of the day that they are struggling to meet. What are we doing? If I woke up in the morning and knew that I was going to get whacked with 40 or 50 expectations that I was going to have difficulty meeting, I don't know that I'd get out of bed. Some don't. I don't know that I'd go to school. Some don't. Here's the next response to people who are looking at this long list of unsolved problems. How much do we actually care about all of these? One thing I'll say about us adults. We love putting expectations on kids. Apparently, we think it's fun. Apparently, we do it in ways that are so willy-nilly that we completely lose track of all the expectations we're putting on the kid until we make a list of all of the expectations the kid is having difficulty meeting. We are allergic to the idea of removing any of them. It makes us think we're not doing our job as the expectation motherloaders. It's your job to be responsive to the hand you've been dealt. It's your job to meet every kid where they're at. This is whether you're a parent or an educator. And that means managing your expectations well. Because remember, you put an expectation on a kid and they have difficulty meeting it. If this is a kid who's prone to concerning behavior, what you will actually have done is cause concerning behavior. And if the behavior is big enough, you may decide to do something big in response to it. And now who's suffering? The kid. All because they're having difficulty meeting certain expectations? Yes. When you rewind the tape, that is exactly what's going on at the beginning of the tape. An expectation a kid is having difficulty meeting. Here's another response that I often see when we're looking at this very long list of expectations some of these kids are having difficulty meeting. Can the kid actually do all of these? And if not, should we be thinking about that? And if we thought about it, then why would we put expectations on kids we already know they can't meet? What definition of good parenting or good teaching includes putting expectations on kids we already know they can't meet? I get the idea. standards, whatever, high expectations, whatever, but it actually makes no sense whatsoever to put expectations on kids you already know they can't meet. What's one reason you'd want to use Plan C? To remove some of them. Because you either know the kid can't meet them, no point in doing that, or because you've got bigger fish to fry. Let's talk about the bigger fish. Once you have your list, you're not working on any more than 3 at any given point in time. If you try to work on more than 3, you will end up solving none. So we have to manage which ones we're working on and which ones we are setting aside for now. And we can't be allergic to the idea of setting expectations aside for now. Because for now is not forever, it's just for now. So when people think of Plan C and they think, oh, you mean giving in. There's no giving in the entire model. Well, then you must be giving up. There's no giving up in the entire model. There is the managing of expectations in this model, and especially, I would say this for any kid, but especially for kids with disabilities, who are among those in our society who get hit, restrained, secluded most often, greatly disproportionate to their numbers. We better be managing our expectations with them. And the more we manage our expectations, the less we are managing behavior. And now you know why. So, that's Plan C. Now, in the case of the very volatile, unstable, reactive kids that I tend to like working with, Plan C is not only about prioritizing, it's about stabilizing. Because any expectation you have put on hold for now won't set in motion concerning behavior because that expectation is gone for now. So, as you're thinking in your heads, some of you might actually be doing this right now, as you're thinking in your heads about all of the expectations your kid is having difficulty reliably meeting, simultaneously be thinking, which ones am I going to prioritize to solve? You get 3, max, and that means that the rest are being put on hold for now. Not forever, for now. We good? We have only one other thing to talk about. First of all, any questions so far? Go ahead.
I like Plan B, but my 13-year-old doesn't want to collaborate.
That's a shame. So the question is, actually it's a statement, not a question. My 13-year-old doesn't want to collaborate.
Well, the question is, how do I get her to collaborate without putting that expectation on her?
Oh, well, yes, we would want her to collaborate, and that would be an expectation. That's an expectation you may have to put on her. You may need somebody to help you do it. I don't know the history here. I don't know I would have to ask some questions to really get a handle on why your 13-year-old doesn't want to collaborate with you. There are lots of reasons that kids wouldn't want to collaborate with a caregiver. Among them, and I don't know you at all, you haven't been put in the audience to, right? You're not a plant, right? Somebody did bring a plant that's sitting. Where'd the plant go? Where'd you put the plant? Okay. We did have a plant here for you, but the plant is gone. Why'd you? He's not a plant, clearly. I don't know enough about your situation to tell you why your 13-year-old won't collaborate with you. It could be, just not knowing you, I have no clue, that your 13-year-old is actually more accustomed to Plan A and is still betting on the Plan A horse. 887 Plan A's later, I would, if I was her, be highly skeptical of the first Plan B. Okay, so you might need somebody to help you do that navigating for you, right? And if you go to that CPS Connection website at the end, the second one, you'll find providers who can help you do that. Okay? And one is in Natick, so not too far from here. best I remember from when I lived in this area. I lived in Wayland, where, well, I don't want to say anything bad about Wayland, except that when I lived in Wayland, I always thought that it was beautiful and that the main feature was the Whole Foods. Is the Whole Foods still in Wayland? Yes? Well, thank goodness, because otherwise I would just say that Wayland's beautiful. And between Weston and Sudbury. So I don't know what the deal is. I do know that if I was a betting man and I had had 887 Plan A's, I'd be highly skeptical of somebody trying to convince me that they were doing things differently now. You may need somebody to help you do the navigating for you. I don't know. Plan B is the last thing we're going to talk about, and then we'll take questions, because I got to meet my daughter at 9:30 in Portland, so that we can trade cars, which is a different story. Plan B is where you're solving a problem collaboratively. Solving a problem collaboratively involves 3 steps. They're up on the screen. This is important. They are called the empathy step, the define adult concern step, and the invitation step. You can take a picture of the screen if you want to. Here's the only thing about the 3 steps. Although the 3 steps are fairly straightforward, there are nuances to them that you'll get more information about on the Lives in the Balance website. Cool? So you want to go to the guided, if you want more than what I give you, and 45 minutes is not that long, go to the Lives in the Balance website, find the guided tour, and through streaming video, you will be immersed in this model, and it won't cost you a nickel. I recommend it. 3 steps to solve a problem collaboratively. They are called the empathy step, the define adult concern step, and the invitation step. I like the names of the steps, but they don't matter that much. The ingredients of the steps matter a great deal. The main ingredient of the empathy step is information gathering. Gathering information from the kid about what's making it hard for the kid to meet a particular expectation. As I'm always telling adults, the empathy step is where we discover that what we thought was getting in the kid's way is not what's getting in the kid's way. Case in point. I'm going to tell you 2 stories. Here's one of them. I was doing a podcast with a father who does father podcasts. I think it was during COVID. And he was telling me about his 3-year-old daughter. Now, by the way, many people don't think that a 3-year-old can participate in Plan B. They're wrong. Many people think that non-speaking kids can't participate in Plan B. They are dead wrong. Many people that if a kid has an IQ that is below a certain number, they can't participate in the process of solving the problems that affect their lives. They're wrong too. But this was a 3-year-old who was having, as fate would have it, difficulty brushing her teeth before going to bed at night. So the father's telling me this story. He's saying, but I thought I already knew what was getting in the way of her brushing her teeth before she went to bed at night. He said, I thought it was the taste of the toothpaste. So he's telling me the story. He said 8 to 10 different flavors of toothpaste later, who knew there were so many, she's still having difficulty brushing her teeth before going to bed at night. He said, so finally, I did Plan B. As always, I'm sitting there thinking, and people think Plan B takes time? The biggest thing people say about this model when they're first hearing about it is, when am I going to find the time to do that? 8 to 10 tubes of toothpaste later is when you're going to find the time to do that. Same thing in schools, by the way, except schools don't usually deal with toothpaste. He said, I finally did Plan B. I said to her, I've noticed, this is what the empathy step sounds like, I've noticed you've been having difficulty brushing your teeth before going to bed at night. What's up? Notice he was not throwing her concerning behavior at her. That's big. You throw concerning behavior at the kid when you're trying to solve a problem with the kid, they're going to think they're in trouble, they're going to get defensive, and they are not going to talk to you. And because this is collaborative, you very badly need them to talk to you. Because you don't really know what's getting in the way. They do. She said, when you brush my teeth with the electric toothbrush, it gets water all over my face, and I can't stand getting the water on my face. I couldn't resist. I said to the father, well, now there's a concern 8 to 10 different flavors of toothpaste would never address. The define it all concern step is where the adult is entering their concern into consideration. What are we concerned about? We often have no idea. So I'll help you out with that, right? That's because we've often already moved on to our solutions, which we are often busy imposing. What are we concerned about? It should trace back to the question, why is it important that this expectation be met? And why would it be important that this expectation, and by the way, as I'm telling caregivers all the time, if you don't know why it's important that this expectation be met, then I don't know why you have this expectation. Why would it be important that the expectation be met? I can think of 2 reasons. It could be both. How the unsolved problems affecting the kid, how the unsolved problems affecting other people. And within those 2 categories, it is almost always health and or safety and or learning. Can you believe it? The universe of things us adults are on kids' cases about come down to health and or safety and or learning. That's the easiest and the fastest of the 3 steps. The father told me his concern. I said, what was your concern? He said, well, I don't want the bacteria from the food she ate all day to sit on her teeth because that could cause cavities. And here's how it would be affecting his daughter. It hurts to get cavities filled. And here's how it would affect him. It doesn't always have to be both. I don't really feel like spending the money if I don't have to. We now have 2 sets of concerns on the table. It is time for the invitation. The invitation is where you and the kid are putting your heads together to come up with a solution that meets 2 criteria. Got to be realistic. Both parties got to be able to do what they're agreeing to do. And by the way, trying harder is a horrendous solution. And it's more important than that. It's got to be mutually satisfactory. Meaning, the solution truly addresses the concerns of both parties. Here's what I've been saying a lot lately. And it's not just my work with thousands of kids that bears me out on it. It's world history that bears me out on it, including current world history. If a solution is not realistic and mutually satisfactory, I promise you this problem is still unsolved. Oh, power will get it done for a little while, but problems solved with power are never durably solved. Ever. What does the invitation sound like? It starts with the words, I wonder if there's a way. And what you're going to do is recap the concerns of both parties. I wonder if there's a way for us to make sure the water doesn't get all over your face when I'm brushing your teeth with the electric toothbrush. That was the kid's concern. And also make sure that you don't get cavities, which hurt a lot to get filled and that would cost me money that I'd rather not have to spend. Believe it or not, you are then giving the kid the first crack at the solution. It's good strategy, but it's not the kid's job to solve the problem. It's y'all's job to solve the problem. Y'all are partners in this. It's just that it's good to give the kid the first crack because it lets the kid know beyond a shadow of a doubt you're actually interested in their ideas. Did she have any ideas? Of course she did. They almost always do. And by the way, before they always do, they often say, I don't know. So don't get put off by I don't know at any point in the process. Or silence. Silence can be the sound of a kid thinking. Do not interrupt their thinking with the sound of your own solutions. Give them a crack at it. What did she say? You could wrap a towel around my face when you're brushing my teeth with the electric toothbrush, and then I wouldn't get water all over my face, and I also wouldn't get cavities. Who won? Both.
who lost nobody, whose authority was undermined? Nobody's. The empathy step is where the kid has voice. The define it all concern step is where the caregiver has voice. The invitation is where they are coming together rather than engaging in conflict. And the whole process gives both kid and caregiver agency. And that is how we help schools get rid of discipline referrals, detention, suspension, expulsion, restraint, seclusion, corporal punishment, and arrests at school. That is how it is being done. I'm in the process of doing that now with the Boston Public Schools, which is quite the undertaking, but it'll be good when we're done. I want to finish and then take questions. The problem with these short talks is that people usually have more questions when I'm done than when I started. But that was your fate before we even started. I should have announced it at the beginning. I apologize. One more story about what this sounds like, just to give you a feel for it. Way back, a long time ago, when I was just getting rolling with this model, I did my first meeting with a little 4-year-old girl and her mother. Single mom, little red-haired girl. She must be in her 30s at this point. I hope she's doing well. For my first 30 minutes of most first meetings, I meet with the parent or parents. And what am I asking them about? The expectations the kid is having difficulty meeting. If they want to spend, I don't want to sound callous, but if they want to spend 2 minutes telling me about the kid's concerning behavior, I will let them so they know I feel their pain. But then I don't want to hear about what's late anymore. I want to hear about what's early, or I'm not going to help them. And I am in one of the helping professions. So are parents. So are educators. I want to make sure we're talking about things that will permit me to help. It sounded horrible. Horrible. Dozens of meltdowns almost every day. What quickly became apparent in listening to the mom is that she had been blessed with a very concrete, literal, black and white, inflexible, rigid thinker as a daughter. And as I listened, it also became apparent that the apple had not fallen far from the tree. After about a half an hour, I got my list of unsolved problems. That's what I came here for. Out goes the mom, in comes the kid from the waiting room. In, as usual, walks an adorable little kid. As part of my usual conversations with these kids, I like to ask them if they can think of anything that caused a big blowout between them and their parents in the last week. I said to the little girl, "Can you think of anything that caused a big blowout between you and your mom in the last week?" She said, "Yes." These very black and white thinkers also tend to be very serious. I said, "What caused a big blowout between you and your mom in the last week?" She said, "My mom poked a hole in my chicken pot pie." I'm sitting there thinking, I never heard of that one before. And by the way, those are the ones I'm really fascinated by. There aren't that many left. But if I hear one more about a kid losing it over homework, I'm gonna die. But here sitting in my office on this day is a specimen. She lost it because of a hole being poked in her chicken pot pie in the last week. I'm on the edge of my seat. I said, "Your mom poked a hole in your chicken pot pie. Why'd she do that?" She said she wanted to make sure it wasn't too hot for me to eat on the insides. I'm thinking, that's reasonable. But I've skipped a step. The mom's concern is reasonable. Normally the mom would be in the room. I'd ask her, right? I skipped a step. What's the problem with having a hole poked in your chicken pot pie? She got dead serious and she said, "If you poke a hole in the chicken pot pie, the crust gets wet. and the crust is supposed to be crusty. I'm thinking, I'm going to be famous. I didn't hear about this in grad school. I'm going to create a new disorder, name it after myself, write it up in all the journals. But I'm telling this story for the first time in Charlotte, North Carolina, about a month after it happened in my office. And a woman starts cracking up in my audience. And I stopped and I said, "What's so funny?" She said, I hate having holes poked in my chicken pot pie too. I said, "You do? What's the problem?" She said, "If you poke a hole in the chicken pot pie, the crust gets wet." She said, "The crust is supposed to be crusty." Apparently, this is not that unusual. Although when I'm telling this story, I'm always watching people closely just to see who's self-implicating. Now I want to see if this kid can do anything resembling the invitation. The mom's not in the office yet. Normally the mom would be because I want to model it for them. I don't want to do it on my own. But I want to see if she can do the invitation. I said, "You want the crust to be crusty. Your mom wants to make sure your mouth doesn't get burned on the insides." And by the way, though this is a true story, it is a metaphor for any problem you might need to solve with a kid. No matter how severe you think it might be, these are your 3 steps. And severity is often gauged by the kid's concerning behavior. I'm talking about other kinds of severity that might be harmful to the kid, right? I said, "Can you think of, I wonder if there's a way for us to make sure the crust stays crusty and also make sure your mouth doesn't get burned on the insides." I hope you guys are thinking at this point. How did we do it? I said, "You got any ideas?" Of course she had some ideas. She thought about it briefly and she said, 4 years old, she said, "My mom could get a spatula. She could get the crust of the pot pie off the top. She could lay it on the side. I could eat the crust first. And then by the time I was through eating the crust, the insides would have cooled down enough so my mom wouldn't stick her finger in my food." I'm thinking, the mother has got to hear this. Jump out of my seat, run out to the waiting room. The mother says, "I've got a big smile on my face." She thinks I've uncovered some deep-rooted psychological issue in just 5 minutes. She comes racing after me back to my office, sits down filled with anticipation and says, "What y'all been talking about?" I said, "Pot pies." Her face turned gray. She said, "Oh, we haven't had pot pie since then." I said, "Well, I think you might be very interested to hear the solution your daughter has come up with to the pot pie problem." I said, "Go ahead, tell her." Kid told her. Mother's jaw dropped wide open. Why'd the mother's jaw drop wide open? She didn't know her kid could do this. Why didn't she know her kid could do this? Because she'd been too busy knee-jerking everything into plan A and making a great big mess in the process. Plan B. That's where the conversation takes place. You find out what's really been getting in the kid's way. The kid hears what's bugging you about this and why this is an important expectation to meet, and y'all are collaborating on a solution that is going to work for both of you. I have done this with countless thousands of kids, including incarcerated kids, including incarcerated adults, including psychotic adults in adult psychiatric hospitals. We have done this in countless schools and prisons and inpatient psychiatry units where kids often still get the worst our society has to offer with the best of intentions. Now you know how we do it. Keywords: proactive, collaborative, problem solving, not behavior modifying. And should you take the time to look at the research on this model on the Lives in the Balance website, you will see that when it comes to improving behavior, this model is the equivalent of evidence-based behavior modification strategies. But this evidence-based model does something more. It doesn't just improve concerning behavior, it solves the problems that are causing them. And that, as you now know, is where the action's at. Let's do a few questions. I'm already late, like I said I would be. Let's do a few questions. Anybody have any questions? And you have to make sure I repeat them because that's my learning disability as a speaker. You're up. The question is, how do you maintain this? Well, presumably you started with this because the old way of doing things wasn't working very well for you. So I'm going to paraphrase what you're saying. We stopped doing what was working and went back to what wasn't working because I can't finish the sentence.
I think it's just because it feels like we need to set aside time to have the conversation.
You do.
It gets lost in the chaos.
So there are many, many families that we've had to help create the time, make sure the time is a stable time and a reliable time and a part of every week. And we continue to point out to them that what happens when they go back to their old ways of doing things. By the way, my kids are 25 and 22. We still solve problems together. I will say this, and mine did not have concerning behaviors, so I got lucky in that respect. And I do consider that mostly luck, by the way. But I've been Plan C-ing for quite a while because there's one other reason you might do Plan C. And it's because you want to give the kid the chance to solve the problem on their own. Really good reason to do Plan C. I only get involved if it looks like they're having trouble solving it. And these days, well, if I try to get involved without them wanting me to be involved at 25 and 22, I quickly get reminded that my help is not needed. When my help is needed, I get involved. But these days, it has to be asked for. And it's been that way with those two for about a decade at this point, right? Why am I feeling okay about that? They're very good problem solvers. We started with this at a very early age. And I created the model before I had kids. So no, it wasn't having kids that caused me to change my ways. My ways had already changed before I had them. You might need somebody to help you stick to it. Do an appointment every 3 or 4 months and say, we're only showing up because we want you to help us stick to it. Question?
Yes, on the first step, you have a very sensitive kid. If you approach it like I know you were having difficulty with X,
Yes.
that would be reason right there to say, no I don't, or well you have difficulty, blah blah blah.
So the question is, if you have a very sensitive kid, and the empathy step is potentially triggering a defensive response, what do you do? My first piece of advice, and I don't know if this is going to get you there, but the first thing that comes to my mind is don't surprise them with the unsolved problem. Make an appointment and let them know what it is that you want to understand better. Okay? There's something I'm very curious about, and I would like to understand it better than I do. Can we find a time for me to inquire a bit? Because if you surprise, even though you're doing it proactively, if you surprise them with the unsolved problem, they're still surprised. And you might still get a defensive response because you surprised them. Don't surprise them. That's where I'd start. Good? Whether that'll get you all the way there, I have no idea. But don't surprise them with the unsolved problem. The truth is, I would call what I just said standard. I like to give kids advance notice of what I would like to understand better. Your key ingredient in the empathy step is curiosity. The kid is not in trouble, you're not mad, and you're not going to tell them what the solution is. You just want to understand. I want to do everything I can for the kid to not feel like they are, not that you're doing this, but feeling attacked, feeling like they're in trouble, feeling like they've done something wrong. Okay? This is problem solving, not blaming, not shaming, and no one is in trouble. Good? See what that works for you. Others, go ahead.
Comment early on, paraphrasing what's good for our kids and what's good for your kids, what's good for everybody.
Yep.
How do we get schools to think that way outside of the IEP? Thinking more pressure on our kids. I mean, our daughter just got a 504 because she's anxious. Is there anything, any advice you have on getting schools to?
I spend a good part, although the question is, if this is good for neurodiverse kids and it's good for all kids, then how do we get school systems to adopt it? We've got this in teacher training programs. We work with hundreds of school systems across the world. I was telling somebody earlier tonight that I don't find that the kids are all that difficult, which only leaves some people left. This is a mentality issue. There is no question that kids are under way more pressure now than they were ever. I'm really glad I went to grade school a really long time ago. I think I'd be anxious if I was going to school now too. It's too much. I'm not sure how, I think we kind of do know how it happened, but it is probably too much. And that's a mentality issue. Still a lot of old school thinking in some schools about what's up with kids when they're not meeting our expectations. That process begins with taking a look at ourselves. This is a look in the mirror model. And there's a lot of school systems that are willing to look at themselves, and there are some that are not there yet. And I spend most of my waking hours trying to get the ones that are there, and trying to get the ones that are there to know exactly what to do to get where they want to go. I don't have the perfect sense of where Concord is. You all have a better sense of that than I do. I don't live in these parts anymore. Other questions? I saw some hands. Go ahead.
I have a kid, I'll talk about my 10-year-old there. She uses to clean her room in the morning. It's not bad, it's bad, but my all I ask is that she makes her bed to the best of her ability. Put her books away and pick up her stuffed animals. If my house is not somewhat in order, being the main brain of the family, struggle with that.
So the unsolved problem is difficulty making your bed and putting away your stuffed animals in the morning.
Yes, and if I ask 4 out of my 5 kids, their famous phrase is, I don't know.
Their famous phrase is what?
I don't know. Why are you having a hard time? Or I was overprotective. Come together to have a solution. First I get, I don't know. I don't know. And I can even be like, well, is it that you're extra tired? Like, I'll give the input. And then I finally will get, well, like, because it's something such great, put it into, whatever, fruition. And then it still happens anyway. So it's still like day after day. I've done the punitive, I've done the collaborative, like, I don't know what to do. And I'm just wondering if the brain is just not, because again, due to trauma, it's developed differently. I don't know if that's really stuff.
Well, brains develop differently even in the absence of trauma. So I'm not going to hold the kid back because they have a trauma history. I'm not going to say that the kid can't problem solve successfully even with a trauma history, or even though they have a differently developing brain. We all have a differently developing brain. I know that I cop to that, right? I want to make sure that you're doing the problem-solving process right. I can't tell from what you're saying whether you are or aren't. And I know that if you aren't, it's not going to work. So, CPS Connection website, see if you can find somebody to just fine-tune it for you, just to make sure that you're doing it spot on. I don't think you're going to be saying what you're saying now if you're doing it spot on. Yes, sir. The reason a lot of school systems have moved away from timeout rooms, which is what they're called in Massachusetts, but in prisons they're called solitary confinement. and in other school systems they're called seclusion or isolation rooms, is sometimes because of legislation telling them they have to. That's been the case in a few states, and it will be true in an increasing number of states as states come to recognize that those practices are traumatizing and that no seclusion or restraint ever solved any problem that was causing the behaviors that the kid was getting restrained or secluded for in the first place. So I think of it as unnecessary trauma that is often justified by the contention that it will keep everybody safer, which is, to use a charitable term, absolute, utter baloney. Baloney being the charitable word. My knowledge of the data is that restraint and seclusion actually causes us and the kids to be less safe. 30 kids have died in the United States. In 30 states, kids have died being restrained. I'm not willing to take that chance for something that isn't working anyhow. I find restraint and seclusion to be acts of desperation that occur in the heat of the moment because folks haven't yet identified the kids' unsolved problems and haven't started solving them proactively yet. There are many, many schools that have gotten rid of those practices completely. There are many schools that are on their way, and there are many, many schools working with equally difficult kids who never used those practices in the first place, proof that it can be done. Safety is not the issue. We are way safer when we're not using these practices, but if we are constantly, the question we should be asking ourselves is, why are we so often finding ourselves in the heat of the moment with these kids where we are finding the need to use restraint and seclusion? I can tell you another big reason. Almost every educator has been trained in what are known as crisis prevention strategies that often begin with de-escalating. De-escalating isn't a crisis prevention strategy. It is a crisis management strategy. It occurs very late in a sequence of events and is followed, when the de-escalation strategies don't work, by restraint and seclusion. That is so late, words cannot say. The goal is to paddle upstream, identify unsolved problems, solve them, and restraint and seclusion is almost completely gone in almost all places, if that's what we were doing. It's not what we're doing in a lot of places. That's why some states have gotten rid of it. I've worked with Fairfax County, Virginia to help them get rid of it, a very large school system. They had thousands of restraints and seclusions a few years ago. They are down to a few dozen now. It can be done. If we decide we don't want to do it anymore, it won't happen anymore. We can get rid of 50% just by saying we don't want to do it anymore and setting the bar at 0. The other 50% is some practices that help people be way more proactive instead of reactive. I think of this model, and that's why the website is called truecrisisprevention.org. Boatload of free resources on that website to help schools and treatment facilities get rid of restraint and seclusion. It's not that it can't be done. It can be done if we're committed to it, and we should be committed to it. Death is quite the price to pay. Can you tell I feel strongly about that? I can't stand kids suffering because we are late. And I get it. These can be some very, very difficult kids. I've been working with very, very difficult kids for my entire career. We shouldn't be restraining and secluding them. I learned that lesson a very long time ago when I was taught to pounce on kids. When they spun out of control. Keyword, when. What was I not taught to do? Identify unsolved problems and solve them with kids before they spun out of control in the first place. That's the goal. And I haven't come across a special educator who can't do it. And many of the people who are most ardently opposed to this way of thinking in the beginning come around to it and become among its most ardent advocates in the end. So a person's initial response to this is not a very good indicator of how they will eventually come to feel about it. And it's something we have to do. There's no choice. And once again, I get it. These can be some very difficult kids. I totally get that. We should still be getting rid of restraint and seclusion. Then you're last. Then I got to meet my daughter. So we'd have to work, the question is, how do you deal with an unsolved problem of a kid not getting what they want? That, we've got to be more granular about it than that, right? Because if we say to the kid, I've noticed that you have difficulty when you can't get what you want, what's up? The conversation will go nowhere, right? You knew that already. So you'll have to be more specific about what it is that what the limit is on that. Difficulty sticking with the one mini Kit Kat every day. That's how I'd word it, right? Or whatever it is that they want that they can't have to the excess that they would like. First, you've got to decide, what is my expectation? How many Kit Kats do we do in this family, right? A day. That's your expectation. That's what they're having difficulty meeting. Now we have the conversation. 3 steps. You're our last question of the night, a place of honor.
Thank you for that. Real conversation with a well-intended administrator in a local district says to me, we want to be proactive. We want to try to diminish the things that are causing the problems. But listen, parents, these behaviors are totally unacceptable in our environment, and we also need a plan for what to do when they happen. What's an appropriate way to engage in that part of the discussion?
The question is, and it doesn't have to be an administrator either, I'm going to paraphrase it. You have a school system that is primarily being reactive now, but recognizing that they want to be proactive. The author Ken Wilber would call that conscious incompetence. They know what they're doing. I don't like the terminology, but they know what they're doing now isn't okay, which is conscious. They're just not sure what to do about it. The other possibility is unconscious incompetence, whereby they don't even know what they're doing now is wrong. Okay? But you're describing conscious incompetence. We want to become more proactive. We are reactive now. That's going to take a while. So they may need a plan for the time being for what they're going to do in the heat of the moment about concerning behaviors, because they are not going to disappear in one fell swoop. I told Fairfax County, you're not going to get rid of restraint and seclusion in a month. You got thousands of them, right? We got to train people up. We got to build capacity. Then at some point you can say, we do not do this anymore. So it all depends on where they are in the process. If they're not very far along in the process of becoming proactive, they're going to be reactive sometimes, and they're going to need a plan for that. That's what they're trying to slowly but surely move away from. If they know that that's the direction they're heading in, and that they're keeping their eye on the ball and they're making consistent progress, in about a year, they can stop thinking about the plan for reactive, because now they're almost completely proactive. Good? All depends on where they're at in the process. Thank you all for coming out tonight. Thank you to the alleged over 500 people who've been watching by Zoom. And I hope this has been useful, which of course was the point. Thank you. And now, where am I going? To meet my, and do you want to be late or do you want to be